I'd always yearned for a simple, ordinary family. Growing up in foster care, I was all alone in the world. I had foster parents as a child, but no blood ties. I wanted a family of my own. A perfect family, with a loving husband, adorable children, and me. So, when a kind-hearted man proposed to me, I was overjoyed. With this man, I thought, I could build that ordinary family I'd always dreamed of. But in believing so, I was the world's biggest fool. My husband, George, callously ordered me around after I came home from a long day at work.
Hannah, make dinner, now! Mom and Emily are starving.
Barely 2 seconds in the door, and he's commanding me to make dinner. George, my MIL, my SIL, none of them ever think of cooking. My name is Hannah, and I'm stuck with this terrible family. At 29, I work for a large corporation. George, my husband, was a coworker I met at the same company. George is 30 years old, but since he couldn't get into college right after graduating high school, we graduated college at the same year. First of all, I have to mention that George is currently unemployed. He had a dispute with his boss in the sales department and quit his job. George was angry that his boss was cold-hearted, but I knew otherwise. Even though George and I were married, we worked in the same company but in different departments. I work in the General Affairs Department handling office work. My dedication and hard work were trusted and respected by my colleagues. It was during this time that the sales department manager, where George worked, came to me for advice. As I nervously asked him what was the matter, he opened his mouth tiredly. "Today, your husband suddenly handed in his resignation. Were you aware of this?" Shocked by the manager's hesitant question, I shook my head.
I wasn't told anything. Did something happen?
In response to my visible confusion, having truly not been consulted about anything, the manager explained the situation. "I want to respect my workers' personal lives as much as I can, but..." According to the sales manager, George would casually leave work even if his tasks were not finished. Moreover, he would forcefully dump his overtime work on his timid colleagues. When the manager confronted him about this, he lashed out in anger. George had falsely claimed that we shared housework since we both worked. Furthermore, he stubbornly insisted on leaving work on time, stating that he was worried about his frail mother and sister. When he used his family situation as an excuse, the management could not be strict with him. However, a colleague who had been burdened with George's work complained of mental and physical stress and wanted to resign. The manager advised George that if he prioritizes his family, he should finish his work on his own. George, angry that his argument was not accepted, quit his job on his own accord. To be frank, I'm relieved that he quit. While being considerate of my feelings, the sales manager expressed his honest thoughts. George was arrogant and burdened others despite his incompetency. When his boss pointed this out, he would react angrily without reflecting on his behavior. From what I hear, George was nothing but a liability to the sales department. Feeling guilty, I apologized profusely. "I am deeply sorry for the trouble caused to everyone in the sales department." The kind sales department manager reassured me that it was not my fault. And he was disgusted by George, who had quit his job on a whim, without consulting his wife. Just to confirm, is he really doing housework? And are your family members sick?
All his claims are false. I do all the housework, and my MIL and SIL are healthy.
Upon hearing my testimony, the manager sympathized sincerely, saying, "I see, that's tough." And that's how my husband George ended up unemployed. He believed that he would get a new job right away, but the real world is harsh. Despite his job hunting efforts, he kept facing rejections. George is resentful on his previous boss, believing that he had badmouthed him to other companies. I can swear that my company does not engage in such practices. Even after submitting a resignation, it is common knowledge among working people to stay in the company for at least a month. There are matters like work handover and procedures to be dealt with. However, George slammed his resignation letter onto the manager's desk and went home the same day. It was obvious to me that such an unreasonable person would not be hired by any company. George was content with giving his small severance pay to his mother and sister. He was raised in a single-parent family with his mother and sister, Emily. Their father divorced his mother and left, which seems to have been a wise decision. Both my MIL and Emily are healthy and capable of working, but they do nothing. I pay for our living expenses and do all the work. Whenever I ask George to help out at home, he yells at me.
My mother and Emily are my precious family. You're my wife, so you should be devoted to helping us out.
It made no sense to me, so I snapped back at him. Forget about your mother, but Emily is 23 years old. At least let her get part-time job. George adored Emily a lot, who was 7 years younger than him. Emily was also taking advantage of George's kindness, pleading for pocket money. As I firmly refused to give her money, George started working part-time. It was a job managing a warehouse for a courier service. George tells people around him that he quit his job at a major corporation because his family was sick. He is a man who lies as he breathes, just to keep his reputation. And so, George's part-time earnings became Emily's dating expenses. Not doing any housework or work, Emily started going out with men. I was fed up with my MIL stealing bills from my wallet out of her greed for money. Even if I talked to George about it, he would get mad at me.
Take care of my mom if you're my wife. This is why I can't stand people who grew up all alone in foster care like you.
My MIL scoffed at me, calling me, Hannah, you're so wicked. I was living my days with the worst family. But one day, an encounter that changed my depressing daily life arrived. When I came home after buying groceries after work, there were unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. They were large-sized men's sneakers. I thought we had a guest over, since the shoes were larger than George's. Then, a young man popped out. He was tall, had a handsome face, and his hair was light brown. When I thought Emily had brought her boyfriend, the man apologized.
I'm very sorry. I was on the verge of dating Emily, but I'll take it back.
Contrary to his frivolous appearance, his tone was polite, a wise young man making sound judgments. I spontaneously asked the young man who was about to leave with his sneakers on.
What's your name? I'm Emily's SIL, Hannah.
When I introduced myself, the young man looked up and smiled a little. He looked like a player, but he had a smart expression. The man introduced himself after he finished putting on his sneakers. I'm James. I work as a bartender. Emily was a regular at the bar I work. According to him, Emily confessed to him and he was about to accept, but he declined. The reason was that Emily showed her true nature and spilled everything because of alcohol.
All my money is all from George's part-time job. My SIL is stingy and ugly. She makes me work and do housework.
James deeply regretted that he was inexperienced and couldn't spot a good woman because of that. But, he's a kind-hearted person who couldn't leave drunk Emily alone and sent her home. Moreover, James paid for the taxi fare. Just at such times, both George and my MIL were not at home. So, James got our house key from Emily, who was wasted, and carried her to our living room. I couldn't leave her at the entrance. I swear I didn't steal anything, ma'am. He seemed to be studying at a vocational school during the day and working as an apprentice bartender at night. He was called out by Emily after school. Emily lied about being a worker at a clothing store. James didn't see through Emily's lies and noticed her true nature at the last moment. He may look like a player, but he was a serious and sincere young man. His flashy light brown hair was his natural hair color. I'm mixed. This is the business card for the bar I work at. Sorry for the trouble. He's running late, but he said he's ready to work now. I see. Thank you for bringing Emily home. Have a great shift. When I said that, James went home with a smile. Normally, I would report a young man who was at home without permission and had a connection with Emily. But I intuitively thought that James was a trustworthy person with good nature. It was a silver lining that he hadn't been deceived by Emily. When I entered the living room, Emily was indeed drunk and asleep. She was an annoyance, but to avoid dealing with a potential cold, I covered her with a blanket. Suddenly, Emily woke up and opened her mouth, unable to pronounce her words exactly.
Hey, where's James? My boyfriend with brown hair, so handsome.
Emily, laughing boastfully, checked her phone and let out a scream. James had verbally told her he couldn't date her, but it was in vain. Emily was too drunk to understand James's intentions. But clever James had politely declined through a text. Emily had no recollection of revealing her true nature. She's crying and angry, feeling like James had abandoned her.
What's wrong about me? I've been deceived.
The one who deceived James was Emily, but it was unfortunate for James as well. As I ignored the commotion and started cooking dinner, George and my MIL came home. And upon hearing Emily's side of the story, George became furious.
Did he mess with you, Emily? Where does he work at? I'll punch him for you. We're going to demand damages. Poor Emily.
Indeed, Emily is foolish and pitiful, but it's completely due to her own resentment. As I was worried about causing trouble for James, Emily glared at me.
Hannah, did you say something to James?
She showed me the text on her phone, causing me to gasp. The message read, "I can't date a liar." Emily had drunkenly revealed everything, but she thought I was the one who tattled. George and my MIL also confronted me, so I explained the truth of my encounter with James at the entrance. He was trying to take care of Emily and was about to leave the house when we ran into each other. That's all. I asserted that I hadn't said anything unnecessary to him. George clicked his tongue and turned his face away from me.
Emily, let's eat sushi today. It's premium sushi.
George decided to order sushi delivery on his own. And he started eating the premium sushi with my MIL and Emily, all on my tab, without touching any of the dinner I had prepared. As I sat eating the dinner I had prepared alone, the three of them were laughing.
Eating sushi as a family is the best. It makes up for the usual terrible cooking. Really. It's so delicious. It compensates for the usual bad food.
George also agreed and laughed along with my MIL. While enduring their mockery, I felt more emptiness. Is this the family I wanted when I got married? How stupid. Suddenly, the face of my only family member with whom I'd become estranged after marriage floated in my mind. And for some reason, I recalled James's kind smile and was parted. A turning point for me arrived several days later. While cleaning the house on my day off, George brought me a bank book. Seeing the deposit notification, I panicked. The bank book recorded the savings I had carefully accumulated before our marriage. George showed me the cash card and seal with a triumphant look.
I'm giving the $100,000 you saved to my parents and sister. If you refuse, we divorce.
This was the money I had been saving for the future expenses of our child. I thought that if we had a child, George might keep a distance from his mother and Emily. But George completely denied my dreams, saying,
"I care about my mother and sister more than our kid."
"Do as you like." I had hoped to build a happy and ordinary family, but it seemed impossible. I showed George the divorce papers that I had prepared for him.
"If you accept this, we're getting a divorce. It's over between us."
George joyfully filled in the necessary information on the divorce papers and handed them back. That was the end of things with him. Ignoring George, who was elated over $100,000, I packed my bags. Then I left the house and submitted the divorce papers, which got registered just fine. I, having divorced George, had returned to my adoptive father's house. My adoptive father is often absent due to work, so essentially I live alone. When I left home, I called my adoptive father.
"Hannah, come back to your family home."
I, who had been rebelling against my adoptive father since adolescence, felt like crying. Despite our strained relationship, my adoptive father forgave me, who used to be so ungrateful. Living quietly at home, memories from my childhood came back to me. The fact that I was taken from the orphanage to my adoptive father's house. At that time, I had an adoptive mother who loved me as if I were her own daughter. That adoptive mother passed away from illness when I was in junior high school. Since then, I had been rebelling against my adoptive father. I was lonely because my adoptive father was often absent due to work. But now that I think about it, both my adoptive father and the late adoptive mother cared for me. I was fixated on a normal family and had forgotten the love of those close to me.
"I'm divorced now. I'm having a huge burden lifted off my shoulders."
With the load off my shoulders, I was now working hard. That's when I ran into James again. When I was about to leave work, I ran into the sales department's manager in the elevator hall. When I started to say "good job today," the manager kindly spoke to me. "You've been through a lot. You look better than before, and I'm so happy for you." The manager knew about my divorce with George. He sincerely praised me for holding up well. As I bowed and got into the elevator, the manager spoke in a serious tone. "There's a bar that's been talked about in the sales department. I want to go, but it's a bit too fancy for an old man like me. I heard that the manager has a wife and children who is in high school."
"What kind of place is it? A cafe or something?"
Then the manager pleaded with me. "It's a bar. I don't drink, but I'm fascinated by bars." So, he humbly asked me to accompany him. I know the manager is a sincere person, so I decided to accompany him to the bar. The bar, recommended by the manager's workers, was a hidden gem in the basement. The manager said, "Don't be nervous," as he opened the door to the shop. The interior was truly chic, the kind of decor that young people would like. I followed the manager into the shop, but was shocked when I looked at the bar counter.
"James?"
The bartender was James, whom I had bumped into before the divorce. He was a bit surprised too, but quickly smiled. "Welcome. It's been a long time, Hannah." The flashy and handsome bartender's words made the manager raise his voice.
"Do you know each other? The women in my department have been talking about a very handsome man working here. He looks like an actor."
As the manager laughed, James seemed embarrassed.
"Not at all. I'm just an apprentice bartender. What would you like to order?"
I'm not used to bars, so I ordered what James recommended. The manager ordered a non-alcoholic cocktail. The bar was quiet and clientele were refined. James' father was said to be the owner.
"At first, I rebelled and went to college. But I ended up being inspired by my father's work."
James prepped a cocktail and I announced that I had divorced. As I was drinking the clear blue cocktail, the boss was unusually furious.
That woman's ex-husband is outrageous. I should not have given him a retirement allowance. Boss, did you get drunk on a non-alcoholic drink?
James prepared a mint soda, smiling at me who was forcing a smile. He offered the mint soda to the boss for free. The boss calmed down a bit and asked while drinking mint soda.
Hey mister, do you send drinks from other customers? Like in dramas?
James laughed cheerfully at the boss who was asking seriously. I've never done it. Urban legend, perhaps? I was having a pleasant time at the bar when suddenly my phone rang. I was about to step outside, but James told me it was okay to answer the call here. Upon confirming who it was George, my ex-husband whom I had divorced. I was annoyed by the interruption of the fun gathering, but I answered because the calls were persistent. Before I could ask the purpose of the call, George complained loudly.
I can't withdraw money. Your balance is 0.
Of course.
That's after I transferred the deposit to another account.
Think about it. Would anyone keep a passbook with a $100,000 deposit in a house where those 3 greedy people live? It is for sure that it would be stolen, so I had to take measures in advance. The passbook George stole from me was a dummy. The real one was carefully hidden by me. That's why I still have the $100,000. When I told him, George was dumbfounded. He, my former MIL, and Emily were having a luxurious time overseas. They gambled, and as their funds started to run out, they tried to dip into my $100,000. However, they couldn't withdraw the money and were so distressed they called me. George threatened me to send all my assets immediately.
I refuse. I handed over the passbook obediently. I also gave up the house in the property division.
I coldly declared that I no longer knew anything about it. In the meantime, James asked me to lend him my phone. In front of me and the boss, he ruthlessly demanded George. There is a tab of $3,000 of your sister's drinks. I'm sorry, but please pay. After saying only that, James returned my phone to me.
So work hard for your beloved mother and sister, big brother.
George cried for help, but I hung up the call. When I apologized for making a fuss, James offered me a cocktail with a smile. It's on me. And a ginger ale for the boss.
Let's toast to the refreshing turn of events.
James, the boss, and I toasted to George's miserable fate. From then on, George really fell into hell of debt. When he was at a loss in a hotel overseas, a kind gentleman approached him. The gentleman was a president in finance and offered to lend him money if George was in trouble. George, who was in dire need of money, jumped at it without thinking about the interest. As a result, his debt ballooned to $500,000, and he was in a crisis. The kind gentleman even prepared a job for him to repay the loan. Now, it seems George is working on a fishing boat. Nobody knows where is it now. Emily and my MIL had an obligation to repay. Working from morning till night, except for sleeping. They sold their house and now lived in a small apartment. I was living as usual at my parents' home. Today, unusually, my foster father was here, so we were chatting.
You're well prepared. Pitching my ex-husband to the deep end.
The one who lent money to George and effectively sent him to a debt trap was my foster father. He was a known figure in the financial industry, well connected in various fields. George was on a family trip abroad with my parting gift. It was impossible with George's part-time job salary, but he sold all of my jewelry. George was ecstatic because he got a lot of money. He was having a blast overseas with that money. When I got married, my foster father told me to protect this one thing. He strictly ordered that when I divorce, I should leave the jewelry and the house.
I'm always amazed at your audacity, Dad.
My foster father had connections with the precious metal buyer that George used. He had information that George, who sold my jewelry, was going overseas.
You show up just in time in front of George, and you see through everything. I have sources. I also know you are getting along with the young bartender.
I nearly spit out my tea laughing at what he said. After George's uproar, the manager took a liking to James. So, he brought other colleagues along to the bar. That's when my boss said to James,
James, do you have someone you're interested in here? Be honest.
Directed by my manager's leading question, he looked at me while explaining. 23-year-old James had one-sided feelings for me. He seemed to have liked me since we first met. James was self-deprecating about being immature and not being good enough for me, but the manager was adamant.
James, you are a great guy. His looks and personality. Go and tell her your feelings.
I tried to stop the manager's momentum, but I got confessed by James.
I like you, Hannah. If you're okay with someone as inexperienced as me, let's get together. Wait. I'm 29 years old. I'm 6 years older than you. And I'm divorced too. That's not a problem. I like you, Hannah.
In such a turn of events, I now have a 23-year-old boyfriend. My manager was overjoyed, saying,
I'm your wingman.
I was thinking of telling my foster father later, but he found out.
I went to James's bar. He's a very nice young man. He's different from your ex-husband who would berate you. Dad, you're moving too fast.
My foster father has always been a worrier when it comes to me. Although he is an extreme person who can do so much to George who disrespected me, he is a kind father. I am more than happy to be this man's daughter.
Thank you, Dad.
When I told my foster father my feelings with a smile, he smiled back. Next time I take a break, I thought I'd go to the hot springs with my dear foster father. James will also be coming with us. I promised to marry him. Next time, James is going to greet my foster father. I'm sure my father and James will make a good family. I reported to my father with a smile that I was going to start a new family. My father smiled and said,
Congratulations, Hannah.
My brother and I have been close since we were kids. Even after we became adults, until he got married, we often spent our weekends together. Years passed since he got married. One day, when I assumed he was living happily, I received a shocking message from him. I'm being accused of an affair I know nothing about, and they're demanding compensation in the divorce court. It seemed that my sincere and earnest brother was being sued by his sister-in-law. I immediately headed to my brother's house. My name is Ava. I'm a 31-year-old woman working as a lawyer. After graduating from law school, I became a lawyer and now work at a prominent firm. I always struggled with studies, so it wasn't an easy journey to get where I am today. Still, I became a lawyer and now live a busy but fulfilling life. Of course, every day is a day of learning, and I think it will always be. But I have a unique hobby. Gaming. I'm what you call a gamer, and when I have time, I play online games with my brother, also a gamer. Samuel, my brother who's 5 years older, supported me during my college admissions and bar exams. We're still very close. I was forming my career as a lawyer while enjoying games with Samuel. But since he got married last year, we played less frequently. One relaxed weekend at home, Samuel called. Hey, do you have a moment? I need some advice. It was unusual for reliable Samuel to ask for guidance. Though surprised, I listened closely. Lately, my wife's been acting strange. She's out often, and sometimes doesn't come home at night. I hope I'm just overthinking. Samuel began talking about his wife, Charlotte. He said she often wasn't home when he returned from work, and sometimes didn't come home at all without notice. I only met Charlotte at their wedding, so I don't know her well. But from our few meetings, she seemed friendly, so I was taken aback. It's not inherently wrong to stay out late or go out, but if it happens too often, it's concerning. If there are relationship issues or infidelity, something has to be done. That's why Samuel consulted me, being a lawyer, about potential solutions. However, from a legal perspective, you can't do anything without evidence. Moreover, involving a lawyer isn't the most peaceful solution, especially without any proof against his wife. Since I didn't have a clear picture of the situation, I decided not to intervene just yet. I totally get why you'd be anxious, I began, but without more details, it's hard to say. There's a chance she might just be out having fun. If you really want to know, our office is partnered with a detective agency. I can introduce you if you like. Right now, there was little I could do. However, if Samuel was truly concerned, I thought it might be best for him to look into it. So, I suggested he hires a detective. A detective, huh? Samuel mused. That's an option. I'm swamped with work, so I can't investigate it myself. I'll think it over. Samuel's response was non-committal. Regardless, I sent the detective agency's details to Samuel's computer. Let me know if you decide to hire them. I'll make the necessary arrangements from my end, I reassured. Thanks. Samuel replied with a sigh and ended the call. His demeanor was notably downcast. The situation seemed even graver than I initially thought. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel neither contacted the detective nor reached out to me. Was he too busy, or had things settled down with Charlotte? Eventually, I decided to check in with him. Samuel, how have you been? Any updates on the situation with Charlotte? It seems you haven't engaged the detective. I genuinely hoped Samuel's concerns were unfounded. However, from his tone, it was evident that things weren't great. It's not resolved, he admitted gloomily. I considered hiring the detective, but Charlotte manages our finances, my salary, everything. I can't afford the detective's fees. Samuel explained the situation in a somber tone. Despite feeling helpless, Charlotte's behavior hasn't changed, and it seems he's been living with anxiety for several months. I get it, hiring a detective can be pretty expensive. Samuel's allowance wouldn't nearly cover the investigation fees. Hearing Samuel's disheartened voice made me feel heavy-hearted as well.
All right, I'll help out. Let me see what I can do from here, so don't be too down, Samuel.
I owed him big. I thought of this as an opportunity to repay a favor and told Samuel so. I wanted to alleviate Samuel's worries, even if just a little. I asked Samuel to wait for a bit and ended the call for the day. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon some unsettling information about Charlotte. Before I could share it with Samuel, he called, sounding more frantic than ever. Is everything okay? Something's come up. He blurted out. I braced myself for what Samuel would reveal next. Charlotte is threatening to sue me for alimony based on false allegations of infidelity. She even has a lawyer demanding compensation for our pending divorce, claiming they'll proceed legally if I don't pay. It sounded like Samuel had been ambushed by Charlotte and her lawyer, with unexpected demands. He explained that he had secretly called me during a break from their intense discussion. Hearing this, I was at a loss for words. I knew Samuel wasn't the type to cheat. Samuel himself probably has no idea at all. That's why he's saying it's fabricated. So, Charlotte is claiming compensation in the divorce trial based on a non-existent affair story about Samuel. Samuel is genuinely a good person who is kind to everyone. Having seen many victims of scams and frauds at work, I was always worried about good-hearted Samuel. I often wondered if he might someday be deceived. But I never imagined this deception would come from his own spouse.
So, what's the situation? What's the other side saying? I mean, Samuel isn't having an affair, so this claim seems far-fetched.
Given that he'd received a call in the middle of our conversation, it was uncertain when Samuel might be taken back. I needed to learn as much as possible about Samuel's situation in this brief time. So, I quickly pressed Samuel for details. He shared that someone had snapped a photo of him during a business meeting with a female colleague, and now they were using it as proof of an affair. In the photo, both of them were dressed professionally, and the location wasn't suggestive in any way. It was clear they were forcibly trying to frame it as evidence of infidelity. There were a few things that struck me as odd at this point. Specifically, the approach of the opposing lawyer. A lawyer is a professional, after all. They wouldn't do anything to harm their client's interests. If it's a case of infidelity, they'll do their utmost to reduce the compensation amount in a divorce trial if their client is the one having the affair. If their client is the victim, the lawyer's job is to claim the maximum compensation. But demanding compensation based on such flimsy evidence was highly suspicious. If they truly studied law, then they're a truly terrible lawyer. If such unreasonable demands were met, anyone could make wild compensation claims. There was no need to accept such an absurd request. As family, I couldn't stand by and do nothing.
Samuel, I'm coming over right now. Don't answer anything they say until I get there. Just stay put and wait for me.
I decided to step in as Samuel's lawyer and talk to Charlotte and her lawyer. From lounging in my casual clothes, I quickly changed into my suit, shifting into work mode. I called a taxi and headed to Samuel's house as fast as I could. Upon arriving, I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. It was Samuel who answered, and he welcomed me inside. Heading to the living room, I found Charlotte sitting next to an unfamiliar man. This man seemed to be Charlotte's attorney. Both of them looked at me in surprise.
Sister-in-law, it's been a while.
I greeted Charlotte briefly and then introduced myself to the man beside her.
Nice to meet you. I'm Ava, an attorney. I'm here today representing Samuel.
At my words, both Charlotte and her attorney looked shocked.
What? Ava, a lawyer? You're joking, right?
Charlotte mumbled, exchanging a quick glance with the man beside her. It's understandable that she was taken aback. She had no idea that I practiced law. I had been approached for free consultations and mentioned behind my back, leading to past troubles. As a result, I seldom share my profession with anyone other than close friends and family. Of course, that includes relatives too. Samuel understood my sentiments, so he never mentioned my job to Charlotte. That's probably why she was so surprised to see me step in as a lawyer. Charlotte controlled Samuel's income. He wouldn't have the means to hire a lawyer under normal circumstances. Perhaps she thought Samuel would be defenseless and took this opportunity to make her claims. Silently seated were Charlotte and her attorney. As I was pondering the next move, Charlotte's supposed lawyer spoke up.
I don't care if you're a lawyer or not. Your brother cheated. He should obviously pay compensation, right?
Beside him, Charlotte nodded in agreement. Did they genuinely believe they could win compensation in a divorce case with that?
What do you have as evidence of this alleged affair?
While I could never believe any tales of Samuel's infidelity, the two kept insisting even after I arrived. Wondering if they had any additional evidence beyond what Samuel shared with me, I pressed the opposing lawyer.
He was having dinner with another woman.
That's solid proof. Let's say we'll let it slide for $50K. You wouldn't want this getting out to family or his workplace, would you? The man's words could be construed as a threat. I almost chuckled. Demanding $50K based on such a flimsy accusation. Doesn't he realize how ridiculous he sounds? His bold claims only made me want to laugh more. By this point, my suspicions were nearly confirmed. That this attorney might just be a fake. Despite being a so-called attorney, he had employed what seemed like threats against Samuel, something that had caught my attention from the start. I initially thought he might just be a corrupt lawyer. But even with a genuine attorney like me present, he kept making statements no real lawyer would utter. Claiming $50,000 compensation based on a mere public meeting is absurd. Just being in a suit in broad daylight in a public place doesn't prove infidelity. To prove adultery, there needs to be direct evidence of actual misconduct. Any attorney would know this. It's a fundamental aspect of the law. If he doesn't even know this, something's off.
I understand your concerns, I began, but we can't just agree to the payment. Sir, could you provide your attorney license number and your full name? If you could also provide the name of your firm, I'll get in touch to set up another meeting.
I pressed the opposing lawyer for his credentials. As expected, he began to falter.
I can't quite remember my license number right now. I must have forgotten. Please contact my wife for appointments.
Forgetting one's own attorney license number? That's unimaginable for a real attorney. It's clear he's trying to deflect and quickly exit this situation.
You can't say it, can you? Because you're not a real lawyer.
I hit the nail on the head. I thought he would admit it now, but he defiantly countered.
What are you talking about? That's absurd. I could sue you for defamation.
If he could, I wished he would. I couldn't help but burst out laughing.
If you're genuine, then tell me. A trustworthy attorney wouldn't hide their identity. And a real attorney wouldn't threaten to sue over such a minor issue.
I replied with a smirk, leaving him speechless. The tables seemed to have turned. Both Charlotte and the imposter attorney looked defeated. Now, the ball was in my court.
Mr. Fake Attorney, aren't you actually Logan, sister-in-law former classmate? You work in sales, don't you?
Hearing this, the two of them looked up in shock. Samuel, who had been quietly watching the exchange beside me, looked at me in surprise.
You're not an attorney. You're SIL's affair partner. It wasn't Samuel having the affair, it was you two, wasn't it? Am I right, Charlotte?
Everyone in the room was taken aback by my revelations. The sudden appearance of an attorney who knew everything must have been startling. I had been consulted by Samuel, and after learning he couldn't afford to investigate, I took matters into my own hands. I couldn't stand seeing Samuel so distressed. An investigation revealed Charlotte's affair. I had been informed of every detail about the man she was seeing, including his identity. When I arrived at the house and saw Charlotte with the man next door, I was equally taken aback. Turns out, the man who claimed to be Charlotte's lawyer was actually her affair partner. I'd done my homework. I let them know I had plenty of evidence of Charlotte's affair and reminded them that Charlotte and her partner would be the ones paying compensation.
So, are you still planning to claim compensation from Samuel?
Upon hearing my question, both Charlotte and Logan silently shook their heads.
I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please forgive me.
Perhaps realizing she would be the one paying, Charlotte's tone shifted to remorseful and apologetic. Logan, seeing Charlotte's demeanor, gave a slight nod of his head. Charlotte then began to talk about the fake affair. It seemed Logan had expressed his wish to marry her, and she had felt the same way. They decided to fabricate an affair to push for the divorce. The idea of also getting compensation money seemed like a good plan to her. It baffles me how someone could think, let alone execute, such a plan. Then Samuel, who had been silent till now, spoke up.
You betray someone and try to frame them with a crime. You think just saying sorry will settle it? I've always trusted you as my wife. So be prepared for the consequences of what you've trampled upon.
Samuel spoke calmly but with palpable anger towards Charlotte. He was right. A mere apology can't make up for such deceit.
You might not be aware, but claiming to be a lawyer without a license is a serious crime. You could face jail time or a hefty fine. And Logan, you're implicated too. There's no escaping this.
Upon hearing this, both of their faces turned pale. It seemed they hadn't anticipated the gravity of the situation. Charlotte, in a frantic tone, said,
I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't know. I truly apologize.
Logan quickly stood up from his chair and also began to deeply apologize. I'm truly sorry. We didn't think it through. Please forgive us. Their fervent apologies were a stark contrast to their earlier demands. It was a foolish display.
I don't care what happens to you too. I'm reporting this, Samuel declared.
It's often said that the kindest people have the fiercest anger. Samuel, without a second glance at the desperately apologizing duo, went on to make his report.
Wait, please. Just spare us that.
Ignoring their pleas, Samuel called the authorities. In the end, both were arrested. They eventually faced prison time. In the end, Samuel and his wife divorced, and the compensation from the divorce settlement offset any other financial matters. They agreed to have no future interactions. Charlotte was left without any defense, reduced to just tears. They tried to benefit by deceiving others and falsely accusing them. It was indeed a case of facing the consequences of their own actions. Regretting now is too late, but hopefully they would change for the better. After the divorce, Samuel seemed to have regained his old spirit. Ever since getting married, Samuel and I have been enjoying online gaming, something he had set aside for a while. After the whole divorce debacle with Charlotte, Samuel moved out of the room they shared and started anew in a different place, trying to shift his feelings and begin a fresh chapter. For a while, he seemed to have lost trust in people and kept his distance. But lately, I've noticed he's been slowly venturing out for meals with friends. Once Samuel feels a bit more settled, I'm thinking of introducing him to some of my trustworthy friends. More than anything, after all the hurt he's been through, I want Samuel to find happiness.